I was standing on the sidewalk out front, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, when my phone buzzed. "I'm in town." "Coffee?" I looked up, and there she was at the top of the block. And in that second, an arm slid through mine from the right, warm and sure, like it had always belonged there. My neighbor from next door. She looked up at me and smiled like she had rehearsed it her whole life. "You forgot your coffee, love," she said. Not to me, to the street. Bianca froze. What I didn't know then was that my neighbor hadn't drifted into that moment by accident. And what she wanted in return took me 5 weeks to understand. My name is Desmond Carr. I am 34 years old, and I build furniture with my hands in a converted brick carriage house behind a brownstone in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. Bookcases, reading rooms, cabinets meant to outlive the people who order them. I work in walnut and cherry and white oak, and I work slowly. And my clients know that when they knock on my door, if they need something fast, they should call somebody else. I am the man people call when they need a table to stand steady for 100 years. I am not the man they call when their own lives start shaking. This is the block my grandparents lived on. I spent whole summers here as a boy, on this same stretch of sidewalk, under these same trees. The old woman 2 doors down, Miss Willa Ellison, used to leave lemonade out on her stoop for the neighborhood kids, and she remembered every one of our names. When I finished my apprenticeship under an old cabinet maker named Cyrus down in Red Hook, I came back to this block, took over the family place, and opened my shop in the carriage house out back. I have been here 13 years now, long enough that the neighbors stopped asking when I was going to get a real job. 6 years ago, I married a woman named Bianca. We met at a showroom in Manhattan while I was installing a commission, and for a while we pretended 2 different lives could fit under one roof. She wanted Manhattan, the noise of it, the shine of it. I wanted the quiet of wood under a hand plane at 7 in the morning. 3 years ago, she left me for a man named Julian, a fund manager with an apartment high over the park. There were no children, nothing to split that hurt. I kept the house. I kept the shop. She kept the version of her life she had always wanted. The divorce was finalized 30 months ago, and I did not date after that. I did not want to. I built a bench for a client in Park Slope, then a set of library ladders for a professor, and the months went by like shavings off a board. 2 years ago, the quiet house next to mine changed hands. Miss Willa had passed 5 years back, in the spring, and her granddaughter, Cora, bought the place from the estate. She had been living in Manhattan, working as a conservator, the kind of person who mends broken-spined books and foxed old letters and brings dead paper back to life. She moved home to Brooklyn and opened her own studio in the garden floor of the brownstone, under a north-facing window, and she works late most nights. From my kitchen sink, after dinner, I can see the amber lamp on her workbench glowing about 90 feet off across the gardens, burning till almost 10. On the corner of that bench sits a small wooden bird, a chickadee, carved out of dark walnut, no bigger than my thumb, head tilted just slightly. I passed that window 100 times and never once put it together. I never once realized it was the bird I had carved myself. At 22, the winter Miss Willa first got sick, back when I did not yet know that some of the small things you make with your hands go on to live longer than the people you make them for. Her door is 26 steps from my shop door. I know that because we had one January so icy I counted them, one by one, carrying her a bag of rock salt and a jar of coffee beans she'd run out of. Cora and I became careful, polite neighbors. Saturday coffee on her stoop, Sunday coffee on mine. We talked about the weather, about the maple that came down in a November storm, about nothing that could get either of us into trouble. For 6 months before that sidewalk, Bianca had started texting me again. "How are you? I missed the block. You still opening the shop on Saturdays?" I didn't answer a single one. Last week she posted a picture of herself alone on a rooftop, no Julian anywhere in the frame, and standing at my sink with a dish towel in my hand. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know it would arrive with somebody else's arm through mine. That night I walked the 26 steps and knocked on Cora's door. She opened it in a work apron with dried glue crusted along the pocket, and she did not seem surprised to see me. She stepped aside and let me in, poured me a glass of water, and sat down across the kitchen table, and I asked her straight what that had been this morning. She looked at me for a long moment before she answered. "I saw your face when your phone buzzed," she said. "I know who makes you look like that." Then she made her offer. She would be my girlfriend in public, but only in public. and only when Bianca was around. No performance at home. No pretending on the stoop, just enough for Bianca to see, and enough to give me room to end the whole thing clean, without ever having to say an angry word to anyone. She had watched me stay polite for 2 years, she said, and this time politeness was not going to be enough. But she had one condition. Her sister Nadia was getting married in 5 weeks, outdoors at a vineyard out on the North Fork, and Cora needed a +1, not a fake one, a real one. Someone to walk in beside her and sit at the family table, and not leave her alone with her mother and her aunts. She had been engaged once, years ago, to a man her whole family had adored, and she'd called it off 3 months before the wedding. And every gathering since had come with a soft, pointed question about when she was finally going to settle down. She did not want to answer that question alone one more time. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then I said yes. She held out her hand across the table and I shook it, and her hand had calluses on the pad of her index finger and the side of her thumb, the calluses of a person who works with a scalpel and a bone folder every day. On the walk home, 26 steps back through the dark, I remember thinking that I had not held another person's hand in 3 years, and that the shape of hers had already stayed with me longer than it had any right to. Bianca texted the next morning. "Dinner? Somewhere quiet?" I told Cora. Cora didn't even look up from her bench. "She wants quiet?" she said. "Then take her to the ferry house, and bring me." We went on a Thursday, and Bianca arrived 20 minutes after we did, and I understood then that the restaurant had not been Bianca's choice by accident either. Cora ordered for me without opening the menu. "He doesn't like raw onion," she told the waiter. Not me. Bianca heard it one way. I heard it another. Bianca tried to be gracious. She asked Cora what she did for a living, and Cora answered in a single sentence and turned the whole conversation back to my last commission, and Bianca's smile got thinner by the minute. She left before dessert, said she had an early call, kissed the air near my cheek, and did not once look at Cora. Cora and I walked back along the water afterward. The lights of the bridge were doubled on the river, and the air off the harbor had gone cool and salt-heavy. She was quiet for a long time, and then, at a bench near the promenade rail, she said, "My grandmother used to stand right about here. She said the harbor tells you what year you're actually living in, not the year the calendar says." I didn't answer that. I just filed it away somewhere I wouldn't lose it. We didn't touch the whole walk. But somewhere past the second lamppost, I noticed I had slowed my stride to match hers without deciding to, and that she had let me, and that neither of us sped back up to fix it. Over the next week, we found the rhythm of it. Saturday coffee on her stoop, except the distance between our 2 chairs had shifted an inch closer, and neither of us mentioned that it had. On a Tuesday, I helped her fix the rotting sill on her studio window, and she stood beside me passing screws out of a little dish, and I noticed she had slipped the wooden bird off her bench and into her apron pocket, the way another woman might carry a locket. I did not connect anything. I only saw that she kept it close, like it was a thing that could not be left alone in an empty room. When I asked what she was working on that week, she showed me a book of Psalms from a private library up in Riverdale. Its spine split, its end papers gone brown at the edges, and she spoke about it the way I speak about a good piece of quarter sawn oak. When I straightened up from the sill, the bird was back on her bench, and I picked it up without thinking. Light in the hand, head tilted. I turned it over in my fingers. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "It was my grandmother's," she said, evenly. "She kept it on her sill for years." I set it back down. Something shifted in the back of my head, but I could not yet name the shape of it. I only knew the weight of it in my palm had been familiar in a way I could not account for, the way a word you have not said in a decade still fits your mouth. On a Wednesday, she brought me a slice of rhubarb pie wrapped in wax paper, because she'd made too much for one person, and she stood in the shop doorway while I ate it off the wax paper with my fingers and didn't say much of anything. On a Friday, I walked over with a bag of tomatoes from the garden Miss Willa had planted years ago, the one Cora and I had been quietly keeping alive between us. Small errands, small excuses. Nothing named yet, but the counting of steps had started to feel like something we were both doing on purpose. Bianca turned up at the shop that following Monday, unannounced, with a thin story about wanting to look at a piece of furniture I'd inherited. Both of us knew it was thin. Cora was already there that morning, because she'd baked shortbread at 7 and brought a plate over still warm. And when Bianca walked through my door, Cora was standing beside my workbench with her hand resting easy at the small of my back, the way you rest a hand when the resting is not the point of it. Bianca's smile went flat. "So it's real," she said. Cora did not look away. "You're welcome to think whatever you like," she answered. Bianca left. Cora took her hand off my back and started to apologize, and I told her not to. I told her she had done exactly what we'd agreed she would do. But something in me had noticed the shape of her hand at my back and had not wanted her to move it, and I did not tell her that part. One evening that last week before the wedding month, I sat on my stoop and Cora sat on hers, and we didn't speak, and I heard her breathe out one long, slow breath into the summer dark, and I realized I knew the sound of her laugh, and the sound of her screen door, and the way she set a mug down on the arm of her chair. I had known all of those sounds for 2 full years, and had never once given a name to the knowing. What I didn't see, all those weeks, was everything happening at the edges. Cora. After I left one night, turning back to touch that little walnut chickadee with the tip of one finger, the way you touch a place you haven't been in a long time. Cora, late at night, opening a drawer where a page clipped from a small journal lay folded at the bottom, under her scrap paper. Cora, watching me cross the garden in the morning, and letting herself feel it for exactly one breath before she turned back to her work. I did not see any of it. I thought we were 2 people helping each other through something awkward. I did not know she had walked into it with a heart that had been quietly sorted out a long time ago. The 2 days before the 20th were too quiet, in a way that should have warned me. Bianca went silent. No texts. She didn't just happen to be at the coffee place on Court Street the way she'd managed to be for a week straight. Once, driving back from a delivery, I saw her at the window table of a cafe with her laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it, and a pen moving in her hand. And she did not look up when I passed. I told myself it was nothing. I should have known better. Bianca did not sit still with a legal pad unless she was building a case for something. And Bianca had never in her life built a case she did not intend to win. But I was not looking for trouble that week. I was looking at the inch of stoop between 2 coffee cups. And I let the quiet fool me the way. Quiet always fools a man who wants to believe the storm has already passed him by. On the 20th morning, she knocked on my shop door without warning. She wore a cream sweater and carried a manila folder. And she sat down in the client chair like she still had the right to sit in it. And she set the folder on my work table between us. She looked, for the first time in all the years I had known her, like she had prepared for a conversation instead of walking into one. "I didn't want to do this," she said. "But you deserve to know she hasn't been honest with you." She opened the folder and slid a printed page across the table, slow, watching me the way you watch a fuse burn down toward the powder. It was an essay from a small conservation journal, dated 3 summers back, from before I had ever heard Cora's name spoken again. The title was "On Rebinding My Grandmother's Book of Verse," and it was written by Cora Ellison. Bianca had circled one paragraph in red pen. I read it. It was about a book of poems Cora had rebound for her grandmother in the last years of the old woman's life. And there, right in the middle of it, was a line about a small walnut bird the neighbor's boy had carved to sit on her grandmother's windowsill through the winter she first fell ill. She kept it there until the end, Cora had written, and I have kept it since. I read it twice. The paper was smooth and cool under my thumb, and the red ink of that circle seemed louder than anything else in the shop. Bianca was watching my face the entire time, waiting for it to fall. 3 years ago, she wrote about you. In a magazine, she said. You cannot possibly still believe that thing on the sidewalk was an accident. She came back to this block for you. She has been waiting the whole time. She staged the entire thing, and you walked right into it, like a man walking into his own front door. Something did happen in my chest when I read that paragraph. But it was not the thing Bianca thought was happening. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. Not really. It was a slow, strange brightening, the way a dark room comes up when a hand turns a dimmer by degrees. I remembered the way Cora had ordered dinner for me without opening the menu, like she had known my plate for years. I remembered how the little bird was never quite in the same spot twice on her bench, because her hand kept finding it. I remembered her silence at the promenade rail, and the sentence about the harbor she had given me like a gift, and then let go of before it could turn into anything. I remembered her hand at the small of my back, and how I had not wanted her to move it. I remembered the pie eaten off wax paper, and the tomatoes, and the inch her chair had traveled toward mine. and the wooden bird carried in an apron pocket, and the breath she let out into the summer dark. 1,000 small things I had walked past for 2 full years without ever once letting myself see them. And Bianca, meaning to break me in half, had just gathered every one of them up and laid them out in a straight line and handed me the answer to a question I had been too careful to ask. Bianca read my face wrong. She thought I was crumbling. She leaned in closer, and her voice dropped into the soft, patient register she used when she was certain she was already winning. "Come back," she said. "I made a mistake. I know I did. Julian was a mistake. This woman is using you. She's a lonely little bookbinder next door, and she is using you. And you are too decent a man to see it." I looked at that circled paragraph and understood that Bianca and I had never once read the same page the same way. She saw a woman who had schemed her way into my life. I saw a woman who had rebound her grandmother's book of verse, kept a small thing a stranger carved, and written one honest line about it years before she could have known we would ever end up neighbors again. One of us was holding a confession and calling it a trap. The paper did not change depending on whose hand it sat in. Only the hands changed. I didn't say anything for a long minute. I folded the printed page in half. I folded it again, and the crease went sharp under my thumbnail. I slid it into the chest pocket of my flannel shirt, and I felt the small square of it settle there against me like something I meant to keep. Then I looked up. "Thank you, Bianca," I said. "You can go now." She hesitated. She had not planned for that sentence, and there was no page in her folder for it. She stood up slowly, gathered her things, and said, "You are going to regret this." Then she picked up the folder, and the cover closed with a small flat sound, and she walked out of my shop for the last time, and I did not get up to see her to the door. I sat where I was for 10 minutes. I did not carve anything. The coffee I had poured at dawn had gone stone cold on the bench, and I did not drink it. I only sat with my hand pressed flat against the pocket of my shirt, over the folded page, feeling it rise and fall with my own breathing. I thought about how strange it was that the worst thing my ex-wife could think to do to me had turned out to be the kindest thing anyone had done in years, and that she would go her whole life never knowing it. Then, that afternoon, I walked the 26 steps to Cora's studio. She was at her bench, sewing a spine on a small octavo, and she looked up and saw my face and set the needle down on the metal plate beside her with a soft click. I laid the folded page on her bench in front of her without a word. She read it. She did not flinch. She nodded slowly, and I watched her nod, and I understood in that nod that she had been waiting for this exact conversation for 2 years and had already prepared every answer she would ever need. I waited for the anger to come. It didn't. "I need to think," I said. She did not try to talk me out of anything. She only started answering the questions I had not yet managed to ask. 3 years ago," I said. She shook her head. "Longer than 3 years. Since my grandmother's funeral." "The sidewalk," I said. "Did you plan it?" "No," she said. "I came into the neighborhood that morning for Nadia's dress fitting. I did not know Bianca would be there. But when I saw your face when your phone buzzed, I did not think about it, and I did not plan a single second of it. I walked to you, and I do not regret walking to you." "Why did you say yes so easily that first night?" I asked. "The shortbread, the hand at my back at the shop, every one of those things." She did not look away from me, not once. "Because I have been rehearsing all of it in my head for 2 years, she said. "And last week I was finally handed a reason to do any of it out loud." "The wedding," I said. "The condition." She was quiet for a while, turning the bone folder over and over in her fingers. Then she said, "It is a real condition. I did not want to walk in there alone. But yes, I also wanted you there. I am not going to lie to you about that, and I am not going to lie to myself about it either. I have done enough of that for one lifetime." I asked her the only question I had left. "All this time," I said, 26 steps away, "why didn't you ever just tell me?" She looked at the bird on her bench for a moment before she answered. "Because a man who is still healing does not need a woman standing in his doorway, asking him to hurry up," she said. I could wait. I was good at waiting. I had a bird, and a lamp, and a north window, and I told myself that was a whole life, and most days I believed it. I sat there, and I waited for the anger to come, because I felt like a man was supposed to be angry when he found out he had been walked toward on purpose. But it never came. What came instead was a quiet, unfamiliar feeling of being seen all the way down. Nobody had looked at me the way Cora had looked at me for 2 years, from a distance of 26 steps, without ever once asking me for a single thing in return. And nobody, I realized right there at her bench, had ever loved me quietly before. Everyone else in my life had needed the loving to be loud. They had needed me to notice it, to say it back, to prove it on a schedule, to keep the account balanced to the penny. Cora had just kept a small wooden bird in the pocket of her apron and made me coffee on Saturday mornings and let me be exactly the man I already was, and asked for nothing, and that was a kind of love I did not have a word for, because I had never once held it in my hand before. For a second, I let myself picture those 2 years from her side of the garden. The lamp on past 10. The bird moved and set back down and moved again. A man 26 steps away, healing so slowly she must have wondered some nights whether he ever would. She had watched all of it and never once knocked. I did not know if that was patience or loneliness, and sitting there at her bench, I understood that for her the two might have been the same thing all along. But I did not answer her that afternoon. I stood up, and she did not try to stop me. At the studio door, she said, gently, "I don't need you to choose me. I only needed you to know I never lied to you." I walked back across the garden, 26 steps, the folded page still against my chest, the crease of it pressing at me with every stride. The sky over the harbor had gone copper, and the maples along the street were already thinking about turning. I went into my kitchen and did not turn on the light. I stood at the sink and looked out at her studio window, at the amber square of it, at the shape of her, at her bench through the linen curtain, and I stayed there watching it for a long time before I made myself go up to bed. Bianca called that evening. I didn't pick up. She called again at 10, and I let it go. In the morning, before I had even had my coffee, I saw a post from her at the airport, checking in for a flight back to the city she had always actually belonged to. "Back to real life," the caption said. It was a lie, the way every one of her captions had always been a small, polished lie. But this one, I understood, was the last one she would ever tell me. She did not come back to the block after that. And part of me was surprised at how little I felt watching her go. Bianca thought she had handed me a reason to walk away. She never understood that she had handed me the only reason I had ever been given to stay. I did not go to Cora's the next day. She did not come to me. Her lamp burned until almost midnight, and I sat in my shop with a block of walnut in front of me and did not lay a hand on it. I ate a sandwich standing at the counter. I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence do its work, because I was not going to walk over there and speak from the wrong side of a decision I had not yet finished making. On the second morning, I picked up the block. I picked up the carving knife Cyrus had given me the day I finished my apprenticeship, the handle worn smooth by his palm before it ever knew mine, and I did not plan to make anything. My hands started before my head caught up, and by the next evening it was done. The second chickadee, the same size as the first, head tilted the same way, but with a slightly different angle at the cheek, because I carved it at 34 and not at 22, and my hands knew things now they had not known then. While my hands worked, my mind went somewhere it had not gone in years. I remembered Miss Willa's funeral, and Cora in the second row, holding a prayer book so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I remembered pressing the bird from her grandmother's windowsill into her hand afterward and saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. And I remembered why. Not because Miss Willa would have wanted her to keep it, but because Cora had been standing against a wall of relatives, completely alone, and I could not bear to watch her be alone. I had forgotten that afternoon for years. Now I understood I had been looking at her the whole time. On the 26th evening, I picked up the new bird and walked the 26 steps. Her door was open a crack, and she looked up and did not stand. I crossed to her bench, where the old chickadee sat in its corner, and set the new one down beside it, 2 knuckles apart. "I didn't come to pay a debt," I said, "and I didn't come because I feel sorry for you. I came because it turns out I have been looking at you too, and I just didn't have a name for it." She touched the new bird with one fingertip. "You made the cheek differently," she said. "It's not quite the same bird," I said. "This one knows where it's going." She stood up, but she did not walk over. She only stood 1 step closer, and we stayed like that a long while, and neither of us spoke. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence between me and another person did not feel like something I had to fill. "I imagined this evening a lot of times," she said. "I never imagined it like this." "What did you imagine?" I asked. A stoop. Rain. You saying my name. I'm sorry, it turned out to be a workbench, I said. The workbench is better. It is where I actually live. The next morning I asked if I was still going to Nadia's wedding. She said yes, but not as my +1. As my boyfriend. If I wanted to be that. I want to be that, I said. Then she told me one last thing. If these 5 weeks had not happened, she said, I would never have told you. I was going to carry it my whole life. Why? I asked. Because you married someone else. And because I am not a person who breaks things. Bianca had handed me a reason to leave by turning the truth into a weapon. But truth held gently is only truth. And it waits on a workbench beside a small carved bird for you to notice it. Nadia's wedding was on a Saturday in early September, at a vineyard out on the North Fork, under a white tent with the rows of vines dropping toward the sound. I wore a navy button-down and brown shoes I had polished the night before. Cora drove out with her mother the day before. I drove out alone that morning, and when I found her at table 7, she reached for my hand without looking up. I did not let go of it all afternoon, and when Nadia walked down the aisle of grass, Cora's hand went tight in mine for exactly 1 second, and then loosened again. I met her mother, Estelle, at the reception. She looked at me a long moment and then said, You're the car boy. My mother used to talk about you. You're the one who carved that little bird. I nodded. That was the whole conversation, and it was enough. The toasts came after dinner. Nadia thanked her parents and her new husband and the grandmother she could still feel in the room. Then she looked over at our table. My sister was always the quietest person in our house, she said. But one winter, when she was 19, she stood at our grandmother's kitchen window for a whole afternoon, watching the boy next door carve a little wooden bird while our grandmother was sick. After the funeral, she took that bird with her, and it sat on her desk for 3 years, and I never asked her about it, because I knew she did not need me to. Today I saw that boy sitting at table 7, next to my sister. Under the table, Cora's thumb pressed once against the back of my hand, and I knew this was the moment she had waited for since the funeral. We drove back to Brooklyn that night. Cora fell asleep against the window, the headlights running long over the empty expressway, and I thought about 12 years and 5 years and 2 years, and all the time I had walked through without knowing who had been watching me work. She woke once near Riverhead. My grandmother used to tell me you looked at wood the way you look at people, she said. I didn't understand her when I was 19. I do now. 6 months later, we were still living in our 2 houses, in no rush at all. I built her a small tool cabinet out of cherry, narrow drawers for her scalpels and deep drawers for her glue. She set both chickadees on top of it, 2 knuckles apart, the way they had sat that first night. My stoop step, where I used to sit alone with a cup of coffee, had a second cup on it most Saturdays now. Bianca called once that fall. I picked up. I made a mistake, didn't I? She said. I hope you're well, Bianca, I said, and I hung up, and I felt neither angry nor triumphant, only done. 1 year after the wedding, I cleared out the back room of my workshop. I stripped it to the studs, put in a north-facing window for the light a conservator needs, and in the middle of the room, I built her a workbench out of cedar, 2 meters long, its top as level as a calm lake. I gave it to her on her birthday in October, blue linen tied loose across the middle. She stood in the doorway a long time, then ran her hand the whole length of the top and said, You built this the way you build a table for 100 years. She moved both birds to the corner of the new bench, 2 knuckles apart, and they have been there ever since. I used to think my divorce had taught me that love was loud, that love had to announce itself and prove itself over and over again. Bianca had been loud for 6 years. She had left me loudly, and she had tried to come back loudly. Cora had never once been loud. She had only kept a small wooden bird in the pocket of her apron for 5 years and gone to work. She had only walked 26 steps for coffee on Saturday mornings. She had only slid her arm through mine for 3 seconds on a summer sidewalk, because she saw my face and decided she was not going to leave me standing there alone. Bianca thought she was handing me a weapon. She was handing me a name for something I had been feeling for years and never dared to call. The person who truly loves you isn't always the loudest one in the room. Sometimes they're the one who stood at a window watching you work, the small bird that never flew south and never once asked you to turn around and look back. So let me ask you 2 things. Is there someone who has been quietly beside you for years, and you have never named what they mean to you? And if that person walked up to you tomorrow with one small condition, would you be brave enough to listen for the reason underneath it? If this story touched something in you, drop a heart in the comments and tell me who has been standing at the window of your life. Hit like if you believe in the quiet kind of love. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, and comment 26 steps if you want the story of our own wedding, because something happened there that Cora still does not know to this day.